My name is Marcel. I drive a 1984 Porsche 911 Carrera 3.2 Targa in moss green. So how has it all started? It basically started with the car you see behind me, which is a pretty old BMW E30, 1990, a car that my parents bought new and I was able to acquire in 2001. And it has always been in my possession ever since. So from 2014 to 2019, I had lived in the US, and at some point I decided to get myself an old air-cooled 911. Obviously, I was browsing the usual sites like Craigslist and eBay and all that stuff. And about an hour outside of Atlanta, Georgia, I came across a very stock, very pristine, moss green Porsche 911. It was a Targa with tan interior. So when I saw that car, the pictures were not perfect, the description was not very complete, but I somehow felt that this had to be my next Porsche 911, just because of the color combination that really reminded me of my very first car I ever had. So I decided to book a flight from New York to Atlanta. I got a one-way ticket because somehow I felt very sure that I'm gonna buy the car. Fortunately, a very good friend of mine who is an air-cooled fan and connoisseur, and he has already owned probably a dozen 911 air-cooled cars. He was happy to join me on that trip. So he flew in a day later from New York as well. We got our rental car, drove to Atlanta and checked out the car. And it was actually a pretty funny story. So it was an older gentleman. He was a retired fighter jet pilot from the Marines. And he was at that point in some kind of divorce situation with his wife. And as part of that divorce, he had to sell all of his stuff and, basically be able to divide whatever money is left between him and his wife. So he was really looking to sell the car, which was fortunate for me because that way I was able to get a relatively good deal. So we checked out the car. It was in the condition that he explained to us beforehand. We went on a test drive, we came back, and it was pretty much clear that this is the car. Now, perhaps a couple of words to the guy who previously owned the car. So when we checked out the car, he would always walk behind us with a towel in his hand, and every fingerprint we would leave on the car, he wiped away. So he was very serious about the condition of his car, and he wanted to keep it clean and pristine and whatever. And the whole car was perfectly cleaned and all shiny in the interior and whatsoever. He always had it maintained at the local Porsche dealer. So then obviously it came to the point where we started negotiating. At the same time, my friend who joined me spent some time with his back then still wife, so he distracted her and I got to negotiate with him because obviously the wife was the person who wanted to have more money for the car than him. So we started negotiating and we ended up with a deal which was fair from both sides. And then the journey back home basically began. So we drove roughly 1,000 miles from Atlanta back to Hoboken, New Jersey, where the car was located afterwards. Flawless drive, no issues. We went across Little Switzerland, which was kind of a funny side mark in that whole trip, that we were able to stop in Little Switzerland and took a couple of pictures. And this is basically where my love for green, especially green air-cooled Porsches, has started. Why a 911? That's actually a good question. So I'm not a die-hard Porsche person, so I'm not the kind of guy who says, well, Porsche, nothing else. I love a bunch of cars, unfortunately far too many cars. I actually maintain a bucket list of cars, which currently has like 50 cars on it, and but that's a different story. Again, it has all started in the US, where I became part of a local Porsche community. I got to know the people. I kind of fell in love with their cars. At that point, I never thought that I'm going to be able to acquire a car myself. I thought that this would be too much of a financial burden. I didn't think that it's doable for me. But after talking to the guys, I came to realize that the kind of money I was willing to spend on a vintage car, because I was actually actively looking for a vintage car, kind of allows me to buy a relatively well-maintained older 911, and that came as kind of a surprise to me. I mean, of course, the 911, one of the most iconic sport cars ever built. And when I realized that I'm actually able to, let's say, kind of afford one, I thought, well, amazing, I immediately have to get one. Perhaps a side story, at that point I said I was looking for a vintage car, and I was actually looking for a BMW 2002 in the US. So I traveled from east to west and was looking at a bunch of cars. I checked out a bunch of 2002, but I never came across the right one. And I was a little bit disappointed. I told my car friends in near New York that, I wanted to buy a 2002. And that's when the whole discussion started about getting a 911 instead. Because basically what you pay for a good 2002 allows you to buy a, let's say, okay, decent old 911 in the US especially, because back then the prices in the US were still quite a bit lower than what you would pay for a similar car here in Europe or in Switzerland especially. So, owning especially an older 911 kind of gives you access to a lot of car events. And back in the US, there were a bunch of pretty cool events that I was able to go with my car. I went to Driven to America twice. Driven to America is an event that takes place annually, and it's kind of an event that is in honor of Max Hoffmann, who was the first Porsche importer from the US. That's a very cool event. There were probably, 200, 300, 400 Porsches at that event. There were singers, there were, outlaws. Magnus Walker was there. So, let's say the whole Porsche royalty from the US was there. And that was, both events were pretty cool. I attended an event that is called Redwood Festival. Redwood Festival, it took place in New Jersey. It's a festival that kind of celebrates the 80s and everything that was cool in the 80s. So my car, being an 84, perfectly fit into that event. So we parked next to DeLoreans and all those, famous 80s cars. Everybody dressed up in 80s clothes, and it was a pretty cool event. Then we went to a lot of drives together with my friends from New York and the area. We went to Newport. We called it Newport 500, which was a trip where 5 of us, if I'm not mistaken, took our cars, went down to Newport, rented a house, had a good time, met with some local Porsche people down in Newport, and then 2 days later we drove back home. Then back in Switzerland, I started together with 1-2 other people a community similar to what I've experienced in the US. We're organized, very loosely organized through a WhatsApp group. The club, or let's say the group, is called Flat 6 Syndicate, and within 1 or 1.5 years we were able to bring 50 people with roughly 60 air-cooled Porsches together. And with that group of people, we do frequent drives, we meet, we have cars and coffee, where we meet somewhere very early in the morning, talk, drink coffee, and then go for a very casual drive. I would say I was able to, thanks to the car, join a lot of events, and especially, and that's probably even more important, to meet a lot of very, very good people. So I gained a lot of new friends, basically thanks to my car. You know, as I mentioned, the car allowed me to really get to know a lot of great, awesome, very interesting people around the world. And the car actually also started a little bit of a social media journey for myself. I've never been a big social media nerd. I was not very experienced. But when I got the car in that color combination, I was actually under the impression that it's a very rare color for a Porsche. You know, way later I found out that green was always the favorite color of Ferdinand Porsche. The very first Porsche was green. I guess the 1 millionth Porsche was green. So green has certainly a very long hair within Porsches. But since I was under the impression that it's something very rare, I started an Instagram account which is called Green Body 911. It's basically wordplay, green body, and the G is in a bold letter, referring to G-body. So that's a G-body car. So Green Body 911. And I started to contact people on Instagram where I saw that they own green 911s as well, and I asked them if I can post pictures of their cars on my account, and typically they said yes. And you know, we started writing together, and you know, again, you got to know new people from Japan, from the US, from New Zealand, from Australia, from all over the world. And in the meantime, after I would say roughly 2 years, the account has over 18,000 followers. We have a weekly reach of over 100,000 accounts. And I kind of realized that green Porsches are interesting for people and they like it. And yeah, that's certainly something that makes me happy as well. And again, you know, it opened up a complete new world for me. Again, got to know new people. So I'm looking forward, and I'm going to Germany this year again to the Onassis event, an event that I missed last year because due to COVID they had to postpone it and I was not able to make the new date. But this year I'm really looking forward, and I already know that most of the people that are going to be there I already know through Instagram, which is kind of weird. You think you know the people but you've never seen them. So open up a complete new world for me. And yeah, again, that's something that basically the car gave to me, or owning such a car gave to me. And you asked me what I like about my car, and again, that's something I certainly appreciate, being able to be part of this global community. What I like about my car, it's a couple of things. I also like the things that I don't like, which is perhaps a little bit weird, but first of all, I love the color combination. It's green over tan. Again, kind of mimicking what I had before. So I really, really love the color combination. It's very unique. It kind of catches quite a lot of attention for some reason. It's just a very beautiful color. I love that the car is not perfect. So there are dents, there are scratches. It's a car that's made to be driven, and I guess that's what I'm doing. You know, I did a little bit of tweaks here and there. You know, it's lower, it's a little bit faster, it's a little bit louder. I try to add my personal touches, like the 104 you see on the side door, which is basically the birth date of my son, April 10. I have that on all my cars and motorcycles. Like little things that make it, you know, mine, and that make it stand out to other green Porsche 911s. It's not the quickest car, it's probably not the most comfortable car, but I guess that's exactly what makes it so likable. And it still has the quirky 915 transmission, so you know, a lot of people would laugh at me and say, 915 is such a rubbish transmission. You know, at some point you get used to it, and you get used that second gear does not always engage, and sometimes the clutch does whatever it wants, and you know, it's just not perfect, and that's perfectly fine.